Well, hey everyone, it's Nate. I'm coming to you now with a very special episode of the Vinyl Guide podcast. Now, many of you have likely heard last week, March 4th, 2023 to be exact, Glenn Michael Lockett, better known as Spot, producer and engineer of some of the greatest American hardcore records ever made, died last week. Spot was 71 years old. And if you own any records from the SST label, you've probably seen his name on the credits. Produced by Spot. I mean, that was always a sign of quality when you picked up an SST record. It's on the label's most pivotal early records, including albums by Black Flag, Descendents, Minutemen, Hüsker Dü, Meat Puppets, St. Vitus, tons more. And Spot's sonic fingerprints are all over albums like Zen Arcade, Damaged, Milo Goes to College, My War, even some non-SST releases like Misfits, Earth AD, Wolf's Blood. Again, those are there thanks to Spot. And although he's now gone, he's left this huge body of work behind for all of us to enjoy. And I was lucky enough to talk to Spot a few years ago, in May 2019, if my show records are accurate. And we spoke for about an hour and 20 minutes. Now, that full interview, the full hour and 20 minutes, was made available at the time to our Patreon supporters. We always put extra stuff up there for our supporters. But I only shared about 55 minutes of this interview in the public feed. So there's a lot of people who haven't heard the whole thing. So today, in memory of Spot, I'm going to share the full interview. I think 1 hour and 17 minutes, I think, is the total running time. Going to share it totally commercial free, whatever, just going to put it out there in the hopes that some of this information helps carry the knowledge and the legacy of Spot just a little bit further. Now, before I start the interview, I do want to thank Joe Carducci and others in the punk and SST community who rallied around Spot in his final months and regularly shared and reported so fans and friends that were too physically far away could know what's happening with Spot and communicate messages of support and appreciation. So here we go. From May 25th, 2019, here's the full Vinyl Guide interview with Glenn Michael Spot Lockett. Enjoy. Today on the Vinyl Guide, we have with us Glenn Lockett, also known as Spot, who's produced and engineered hundreds of recordings, some of the greatest titles in punk rock. And it sounds like, Glenn, you prefer to be called Spot. Yeah? I mean, how did you get the name Spot?
It found me. I'm not going to go into the details, but it found me. It's a name that came down through this odd Scandinavian branch of my family that for the longest time I didn't even know I had, until my grandfather straightened me out. And it's actually spelled S-P-A-A-T.
Spot.
Yeah. And so I changed it because it was easier.
Were you born in the U.S., or is this something that you had from overseas and brought with you?
Oh, no, I was born USA.
Okay.
There's so many branches of my family that, some of those other people were born elsewhere, but not me.
When did you first come across punk rock?
Maybe the first time I heard the term was about, I don't know, mid-70s, 76, 77, something like that. Mm-hmm. Insofar as what is referred to as it today, I mean, I was aware of the Stooges before that, and frankly, I think that the music that happened, a lot of stuff that happened toward the late 60s was pretty damned rockin' too before it all devolved down into commercial playlist radio type stuff. So, I mean, that probably doesn't even really count, though. But I was always interested in music that was not the standard commercial thing. And that even goes back to jazz and big band and stuff like that. And then there was that great time in the early 60s when radio was so open and diverse, and nobody gave any of that stuff titles other than maybe rock and roll.
Mm-hmm. It wasn't divided down and split into various genres. Did you consider yourself more a musician or more of an avid listener?
Oh, yeah. Always. Well, everyone starts off being a listener, I guess, at some point. Mm-hmm. And then I had to jump into actually playing because the idea of playing music was good, and Beatles jumped into the scene, and actually I took interest in the guitar before I even knew about the Beatles. It was about maybe 63. Got the first guitar Christmas of 63. And by that time, of course, yeah, everyone in America had heard of this out of the ordinary English band. But I wanted a guitar for whatever reason, like maybe 6 months before that. Maybe I did hear the Beatles. They actually did have a hit in the summer of 63. Oh, God, what was it?
Please Please Me or something like that?
It might have been Please Please Me or something like that. But I remember hearing it at the beach one summer or just on the radio a few times and thought it sounded pretty cool. And but nobody seemed to really be focusing in on that until, what was the first? I Want to Hold Your Hand. Yeah, blah, 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 blah. And then that was the end of the year. So, yeah, unfortunately, like most people, I have to blame them for making me really interested in this new thing that people were going nuts over.
Right.
Elvis didn't really do much for me before then, and Elvis had come to his end. I mean, the end of his first really exciting period when I kind of came into it, so that was not such a big deal for me. A lot of other stuff was, though.
To make it to the punk rock era, which we'll get to shortly, you had to go from the Beatles and navigate through the early 70s, the prog rock scene. What was your opinion of what was happening at that time?
It was all pretty good. 60s were great insofar as the kind of music that was coming forth and hearing it on the radio and experiencing it changing the way the radio presented music and what it presented. And in the 70s, there was kind of a continuation of that. Music kept changing from one thing into another, and I think by the 70s, you were actually hearing more different kinds of music that couldn't necessarily be called commercial, but they were getting popular. Even guys like Ravi Shankar, everyone was checking out, and there was some jazz things going on, and the fact that in '64 Louis Armstrong knocked the Beatles out of the top 10 and had a huge hit, and you had Antonio Carlos Jobim and Girl from Ipanema and all of that stuff. I didn't care what it was. All that mattered to me was whether I liked it or not, whether musically it gave me my thing and made me want to just keep listening. That was what was really important. And in the 70s, going into the 70s, a lot of that same stuff came over the decade divide. And but unfortunately, toward the mid-70s was when radio started going more the commercial realm. They took a good idea and just kept repeating it and repeating it and repeating it.
More of a product at that point.
Exactly.
So you went from musician to working in the studios, yeah? I mean, toward the end of the 70s, you were an engineer, a producer. How did you get your start in that, and who were some of the studios you were working with?
Yeah, I started playing music in the early 60s, was in a few bands through that time, I guess. Nothing of any note. And into the 70s, I was trying harder, and nothing ever really seemed to fit for me. And trying to start my own band was, back in those days, there was no independent music scene whatsoever. You had to go through a process of being someone who could play top 40 or play the popular songs of that day just to get out there and actually play and maybe make a little bit of money, maybe be able to buy a hamburger or, some new fresh underwear after you do that and that. And actually, I think it was easier to make money if you were a struggling musician, because before there was this independent scene, there were more places where you could make money if you followed the rules, so to speak. If you played things that people wanted to hear, because I mean that's how people thought. That's how people thought. So, but none of that ever really took off for me the way I wanted it to. It was very frustrating, and I finally just had to do something. But I was always listening to how music was made, and back then there were a lot of good stories and articles to read in magazines and newspapers about that stuff.
So it's interesting because nowadays, if someone wants to work in a studio and do that kind of work, there's actually schools and classes and stuff like that. But it seems like back in the day, obviously there weren't the schools. You just had to self-educate and get lucky.
Well, there might have been schools, but they weren't very comprehensive back in those days, because the studio, well, if you can call it a studio system, or the studio, the way studios worked is that there really wasn't a whole lot of equipment and situations to go around where you could, let's say, hold those classes there, because most of the time they were having to deal with actual customers who had serious projects they were recording, and they needed the time. So there wasn't a whole lot of open time, even though there were a lot of studios back in those days. But like I said, this is just theory, thinking off the top of my head that it might have been like that. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But it took a while until you saw people trying to set up schools for it or classes for it, and that. At least that's my memory of it. But yeah, it was all learning on your own.
So what was your entry point into getting involved with SST Records and the whole punk scene?
Well, can I first say that, going back to what we were just talking about,
Sure.
at a certain point, I bought a reel-to-reel tape recorder and a couple of microphones, and would just sit around. This is going back to the early 70s. I would just sit in my apartment and just record stuff, record myself, record whatever I heard and that, and eventually learning a few more things. And they brought out those TX 4-track reel-to-reels, the 3340. That that made a huge change in the way recording was done and how people even thought about it. But I mean, that all led up to getting into a studio that existed. I always wanted to work in a studio or just do something, but I wanted to go in there to record my own stuff. Mm-hmm. And once I got in there and actually started learning the techniques and the equipment and so on and so forth, I kind of didn't have as much time to work on my own stuff because, lo and behold, it was actually getting me somewhere, whether it involved making money off of it or not. I just saw that there was I had a chance to build something on it where I kind of hadn't had that chance before, and I just went for it. Right. So, you know, there was just all kinds of things going on. I wasn't having any luck in Hollywood, and I got the hell out of there about 75, I guess it was, and then ended up in the South Bay because I liked the place and I had to go somewhere, and found these people actually building a studio, and I saw a chance to help them build it and actually get into something or get into that opportunity that I was looking for. There it was. That's where I found out about, I guess, the punk rock stuff. That's where I first heard the term. Was maybe, like I said, 76, 70. I'd say maybe about 77.
And what was the name of this studio?
Media Art.
Media Art. So you were part of Media Art really from the very beginning.
Almost. I mean, they had been in another location before that, before I was ever there. But I mean, the studio hadn't opened yet. They were just still building from the ground up when I discovered it. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. What kind of bands were in there in the early days? This is late 70s. What sort of clientele would you have?
Fairly boring. I don't know. It kind of seemed like the dream of the 60s and the 70s had fallen down and gone that kind of more commercial route. Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of people who had been rockers. That wasn't working, so they started becoming songwriters, and they spent too much time trying to make things perfect when they shouldn't have even cared. So it was not it was not really all that exciting, most of the music that was happening there. But like I said, it was a chance to learn a technique and not care about what you were doing. You had to kind of you had to set your mind to where, okay, I hate this stuff, but I'm just going to do it to see how well I can do it, how well I can make it sound. Mm-hmm. You focus on the sound rather than on the composition. Every once in a while, hey, there were some decent people who came in, and there were some folks coming in to just play jazz. And whenever a band came in that you could call hard rock, that was a term that was used a lot back then. Whenever those people happened, I was all about it. You know, I wanted to do those jobs and that. I didn't always get the chance, but a lot of the sessions I was having to operate as the second engineer, the tape op at that point, because some of the machines, well, most of them, none of the machines had remote control, so somebody had to sit there and make it work. Right. While somebody was sitting behind the control board. So I had to do a lot of that kind of stuff, and occasionally making tape copies, right, cassette copies for people, or God forbid, 8 tracks. worst thing ever to melt.
Did you have an acetate machine there to be able to?
No. No dysfunctions at all. It was just all tape.
When you're in the studio, how do you discern between producing and engineering? Because I know a lot of the projects you've been on, so it'll say engineered by Spot or produced and engineered by Spot. How do you discern the difference between the two?
Well, engineering was just doing the job of, let's see, how would you say? It's just doing the basic thing, the basic job that the client wants. They want a recording. Okay, you're doing a recording. You're doing what they want, and you're not offering any opinions on the quality of their work or whatever. You're just doing your job.
Right.
You're driving the bus. That's all that matters. You're driving the bus, period. Producing is where you start offering opinions and that cross into an artistic realm, and there's a huge difference. In other words, when you're just engineering, you really don't offer an opinion unless it's to tell somebody this guitar doesn't sound good, or that drum needs some work, but that's based purely, it's not really based on an artistic decision. It's based on just
the mechanics.
It's like, this paint color doesn't look good under this light, so let's try something else. And it's not saying, well, let's just paint this picture where it's just in the mountains and everyone's got to go, oh, look at that, That's when you turn into production.
When you think about the bands you've worked with, Descendents, Black Flag, Saccharine Trust, those guys, what sort of impact did you have in terms of the production and the advice that you gave them? Were they open to it? How much did they incorporate? What was the relationship like? I'd be keen to get your thoughts on that.
It depends on the situation. For the most part, I guess people liked what I did and wanted me to do it. And I was in a situation where I could, and that seemed to be a good formula there. But some bands were extremely easy to work with and valued my ideas more than other bands. And pros and cons on all of that. But, there's always, eventually, you're always going to be in a situation where you're butting heads with people. A lot of it has to do with some people who are they're so determined to keep their vision, their own vision, what they're working with, what they want to do, that this is what we need to do, and blah, 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 blah. It's got to be like this, and da, 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 da. To where they'll ignore a lot of the basic things that have to happen to make that work. And it's the idea of somebody who reads books about 747s and flying and atmospheric condition and everything, but they've never actually had to fly the plane. Mm-hmm. So, some people would just say, well, so-and-so did it this way, we should do it that way, and don't understand, well, they did it a way that your equipment can't do. Mm-hmm. So don't make me try to, I want this guitar sound. And I say, well, that meant that they were using this little pig nose, and you're insisting on using your Marshall stack, and you refuse to use the pig nose.
Mm-hmm.
It would get crazy.
Would you get to the point to where you were suggesting chord changes, or maybe changes in the arrangement here and there?
Sometimes, More like I think a lot of it actually was more of how we approached the tracking, less than exactly how they played their instruments. I mean, even in the early days, I didn't even tell anyone to change drum heads or change strings or whatever, because on one hand, no one had time for it or the money for it. On the other hand, I hadn't discovered the technique where it crosses over into the art. Everything's a learning curve. You have to learn the technique, kind of put the art on the back burner for a little bit. And then eventually you're going to need that art, to make the basic thing work right. So that it's not just an ingredient, it's a meat, you get a meal out of it.
How were the bands prepared when they came in the studio? I'm sure some were more prepared than others. Which ones were able to come in and just bash it right out, no problem, and which ones needed, extra spot coaching?
Well, all of those bands were coming in from a standpoint of being live performers. Everything they did came out of a rehearsal room to finally a live show, to getting better at the live show and getting more fans, and then realizing, well, now we got to go in the studio. We've never done this before. So they would be approaching it that way. Whereas some of the things that I had done before that, like when I first started engineering, before there was even any consideration of punk rock or whatever, it was people who were coming in from a sophisticated point of view to do what they did. Well, sometimes there were people coming in recording a song with one instrument to a click track, and then other people would come in and add on that. Sometimes even the rhythm track would add on to that. So it was that time when multi-track recording had gone into that realm, where it was no longer kind of like Sun Studios or Hitsville, USA, when everybody was in the same room playing the song together, and that was really the only way you could do it. And then, the Beatles were kind of that way, even though they did a lot of crazy studio stuff individually. Folks started hearing some people using that technique really well and wanting to go in that direction. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a matter of how well you pull it off, and what you're working with. I don't know if I got to a tangent there or not, but
well, I thought you said something very interesting, is the click track. Like I can't imagine Black Flag or Misfits or Hüsker Dü playing to a click track. Are you saying that was part? Okay.
No, nothing like that ever happened. It always started with getting the rhythm track down. And there was consideration on how fast they would play, the speed at which they played. But that was all, most of that was based on how they played it between the rehearsal studio and on stage.
Right.
So there were times where we had to say, wait a minute, is this going to be a better record if you just play it as fast as possible, or should we slow it down just a little bit and concentrate on the dynamics of a slower feel? We had a lot more questions were coming up from that, but for the most part, I would, if I thought something was played way too fast, I would say it. I'd say, I think it's way too fast. I think you'll play it better, and it'll make the cut better if it's just a little slower. So think about that, or just let's try it, and maybe 50-50. My idea would work.
It sounds like a lot of the bands had, I'll say challenges, not difficulties, but challenges translating what they were doing live into the recording studio. The recording studio sounds like a much more foreign environment to them than they were used to.
Yeah, because nobody really understood it, and you had to really get yourself in that environment and learn it to really understand it. And it's just like Mark Twain with his story of wanting to be a steamboat, wanting to work on a steamboat, and he finally got a chance. A steamboat captain let him take the wheel, and he had always looked at the river as this incredible, mysterious, romantic object or presence. And then when he learned how to actually do the boat, all of that went away, and it was just, well, I'm looking at I'm looking at the geometry of everything now. Right. And he was let down on one hand, but on the other hand, he realized this was his dreams, and learning to do his dream. He was a little disappointed in what the realities of the dream were.
It's like don't meet your heroes sort of thing. I mean, even to this day, can you listen to music? I know it can be the SST records you worked on, in particular. Do you pick it apart in your brain, or can you enjoy it just for being what it is?
I used to have no choice but to pick it apart in my brain. Well, when I actually recorded it, I had to know every detail of what I did and how I did it. And I mean, I even wrote notes. I kept some pretty extensive notes on a whole lot of stuff, and kind of built from the notes and that. And after a lot of the stuff was done, you're always going to finish something and feel like you could have done it better. I got to a point where, yeah, maybe I was overanalyzing stuff. That's just kind of par for the course. That's kind of the learning curve. But eventually I got to the point where I just after I walked away from all of it, it's like nowadays I can come back and listen to it without at least without thinking about maybe 50% of what I used to think about.
I mean, that's got to be a hard habit to break, because it was your job for so long to listen intently, and you must hear things like the little noise you wish you could clean up here or there, or mistakes here and there you wish you'd be able to clean up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So when you think about that time, SST had you really as the producer engineer for all their albums, or majority of their albums in that period. It wasn't just because you worked at the studio they frequented, but they liked what you did. They liked what you brought to the table, and you started getting a reputation working then with New Alliance, even some Touch and Go recordings, Smoke 7. What do you credit that to? What was the skill? What did you bring in that those bands in that scene really valued?
Hell, I don't know. I just went and did the job, and I guess it just got to be something that I did, and I knew that I could get through it and get it done. Most of that stuff was that I might have been the only person who could actually get most of those things done on the lack of budget. There were no budgets back then. If you only had 30 hours, you had to do it in 30 hours. Period. If no one could, and sometimes that's just all the time that was even available.
Right. Right. Well, I imagine those bands also brought, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but they probably brought a fair amount of, I'll say chaos, but I don't mean hecticness, but I mean naivety. I would imagine that you were also quite skilled at cutting through that and being able to get a finished product, even though the bands may not be as comfortable or cooperative at times.
Yeah, well, I had to make some decisions that were not popular decisions, and only because that was all we could do. And of course, I also had to make some decisions that I didn't want to make because it meant maybe I wasn't going to get any sleep for about 48 hours. But well, I said, okay. There was a session I did in, I believe it was in Austin once. It was in Austin. I'm not sure. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but it was a 30-hour session for me. I had to work for 30 hours straight through. Maybe I got about a half an hour of a break, but that was the only way to get it done. And after those 30 hours, I couldn't sleep.
Yeah.
I went out. I couldn't sleep the whole day. I went out later that night and got together with everyone who had gotten some sleep. We just sat there and drank beer. And I just drank beer until I finally just passed out. So that was probably, I was maybe into the 40th hour or by that time.
Yeah.
And
you get
that
the
was
energy.
The only way. Yeah, I've had those days where I just couldn't sleep for days. Yeah.
When you did the sessions, at the end of the session, did you give them back the tapes? Did they take possession of the tapes? Speaking to a lot of these artists, they don't know where those tapes are, so I'm assuming that they took them and they ended up in the back of a car, and God knows where they're at now.
It all depends on the situation and the agreement, and all I'm going to say is that there were situations where I had to hold on to the tapes because they didn't have any place to store them safely. So I took that responsibility on my back, and there were somewhere it was like, okay, here's the tape. You keep you take the master, I'll hold the multi-tracks, blah blah blah. And there were some cases where someone didn't pay for the thing, or maybe it exploded, and it was like, well, I'm holding the tapes until you guys figure this shit out.
Right.
Sometimes they figured it out. Sometimes they didn't. Some tapes people have, some tapes I still have, and that's all I'm going to say about it.
Wow. Can you give us an inkling as to the type of tapes you still have?
Well, I've got a lot of multi-tracks. And I've got some mixed, some final mixes of stuff. Some stuff's been released, some stuff hasn't been released. It's just a bunch of stuff there, and
these are bands that we know that are popular or in the social conscience. Yeah.
Yes and no. There's some there's some bands that are probably unknown, or projects that are just kind of one-offs that maybe meant nothing, but for some reason there was no reason to destroy the tapes just in case it would come in. Some of this stuff was over 30 years ago, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe you made a decision, well, let's hold on to this and, we'll use it later, and maybe nothing ever happens and you forget about it, and then all of a sudden you discover the damn thing in a box, and what the hell am I going to do with this shit,
How many boxes of tapes do you have? Because I said that's 40 years ago or something like that. I mean, you've been carrying them around.
I can't. I have no idea. It's just there's boxes and crates and whatnot. I can't define any of it.
So let me ask you this. If Greg Ginn were listening to this, there would potentially be some Black Flag multi-tracks in there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And you would be open to having a conversation with him about either having him settle up his bills and then transfer the ownership back to him?
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, I don't give a shit. You know, it all depends. I'm not pursuing it. I'm not going to pursue it. I ain't going to chase it.
No, you're not going to chase it. But if he was to reach out to you, and I'll be devil's advocate here, I would venture that you would be interested in that because you've been carrying the tapes for 40 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, he'd have to approach me in the right way.
Are you guys on good terms? Was it a difficult parting with SST or a non-event?
It was just let's call it a difficult.
Yeah.
You know, it's something that never settled. You know, and at a time when I thought that it could finally settle, I was let down immensely. And at that point, you know, well, that ball is not in. I guess that ball's really not in my court anymore. So, I'm not gonna put any air in that ball.
So when you working with SST and creating the music, did you also master for vinyl?
I didn't do the mastering myself, but I was in the mastering rooms working with the mastering engineer.
Right.
And that was a huge thing. And of course there's one engineer who to this day is one of my heroes, John Golden. He's still doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it was about exactly a year ago. I visited him in Ventura, where he's got his operation. It's a pure family mom and pop operation, totally independent now. And you know, his son and his daughter
mm-hmm. and
his wife, they're all doing things, and they're keeping it alive, and they're going. And
mm-hmm.
It was great. It was great sitting down with John because, he started off as a musician also, and he played me some stuff that he recorded in this band that he used to be in, and it was really cool stuff, and maybe some of that might come out finally, but
mm-hmm.
We had a long talk that I didn't think was going to go as long as it did, and I recorded the whole thing. We talked about everything. And
Beautiful.
It's pretty in depth, and one of these days I have to do something with it.
When you were mastering the records, the writings and the etchings in the Runout Groove, were those your ideas? Was that your, I'll say penmanship, but certainly your verbiage? Yeah.
I didn't know. I never touched any of those discs.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, I guess we were talking about, like, not every session or project ended up the way I wanted for whatever reason, whether it was personal difficulties or just lack of enough time or
mm-hmm.
technical snafus or whatever. You know, everything finished the way it finished, and I had a chance to have the last word on everything. So that's what that was. And I don't care whether people understand what those things said or not. If I'm sitting there in the session
mm-hmm.
with John and we're going through the thing, I'm coming up with, well, what do I really need to say? And by the end of the session, I had 2 phrases to put on those damn things. And there you go.
Okay. So those are inside jokes, probably only a handful of people or less on the planet will get.
Exactly. Exactly. If they get them at all. I mean, some of them are so cryptic that
don't know where to begin.
It might have been leveled at a particular person or a particular moment that's related to something, or just who knows. So maybe some people don't even know I'm talking about them.
So, Spot, I want to play a game with you here.
Uh-oh.
I read out an etching that you put in a record, and you tell me which one it was.
Oh, God.
I'll give you a choice of 3. How's that? That'll narrow it down. So,
Sure.
All right. In side A, the runout is etched, "Do the creepy crawl." And in side B, it's etched, "Rewash this out of your life." Now, I'll give you the choices. Descendents, Milo Goes to College, Hüsker Dü, Land Speed Record, or Black Flag, Jealous Again.
It'd be Jealous Again.
Yes, you are correct. Wonderful.
Yeah, because I mean, it wouldn't have made sense for that to be in any of the other ones, and Land Speed Record I had nothing to do with.
Oh, you didn't produce Land Speed Record, no?
No, that was their first album. That was like kind of live, wasn't it? I didn't have anything with that one.
Okay.
Anyway, just so you know.
Well, thank you for being honest there. Well, it'll give you a 50% chance. Okay, let's do one more here. Side A, 17 cases, and I'm sure feeling fine. Side B, except for when 6 turns out to be 9. Hey, Jimmy? Question mark.
Okay. That's the Dicks. Kill from the Heart.
All right.
Period.
Excellent.
I know, because I remember that one.
Care to enlighten us as to the story behind that, or is that lost to time?
Well, it was during the recording of it. I think it was because the band went through 17 cases of beer. That's what I'm pretty sure that's what it was. No, there was a lot of drinking going on in that session.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess I might have had some of that beer too. Maybe not as much as everyone else, but yeah. That okay. I can't give you the details on that. I don't remember.
That's fine. Sounds like you may not have remembered it the next day.
When 6 turn, oh gosh, that is so pointed, because that recording was done was recorded at the wrong level going on the tape. There was a mistake made on setting up on aligning the tape machine. I'll put it to you this way: the recording was at least 9 dB hotter than it should have been.
Okay.
And the entire there was distortion on every damn track. Maybe I shouldn't have thrown that out there. Oh. admitting to a huge mistake, but ultimately it came out to be one of my favorite records and best I think I've ever done.
Yeah. Which records are you most proud of?
Well, that's one of them. First St. Vitus album. Mm-hmm. Probably the Descendents. Mm-hmm. And there's too many here to really go into that. I mean, plus I don't really think. I mean, those. Okay, between the Dicks and the St. Vitus, those are the two that are purely stuck in my head. There's something I really like the way it turned out.
And why? Was it, well, for the Dicks, it obviously wasn't sonically, but I guess just the energy,
Well, the Dicks was one of my favorite bands ever, and I think that's one of the raunchiest, rawest recordings that's ever been done. And they were probably the most real punk band that ever existed, because everything that they were singing about is shit that they had gone through in life themselves. Mm-hmm. They were constantly dealing with Dallas cops, and they did not live the best life. They were pissed off at the world, and they were such a trashy band, but there was so much depth to who they were and why they were that way that I just couldn't. I just thought they were just great.
Mm-hmm. And you weren't just recording in Southern California. For instance, Dix was recorded in Austin. St. Vitus that was in Southern California. So you were kind of moving around for the recordings too, yeah?
Yeah, well, I had to. I mean, after Media Art went under, I just had to go pure independent, and so people were contacting me from various places in the U.S. and so I'd have to go there, and I looked forward to it. Any new studio I could work in was a challenge for me.
Mm-hmm.
That was people who decided that it was worth flying me out to do it, and.
Okay, so you weren't on like a retainer from SST, like here's this band that's going to record an album. Spot, can you go to Austin? That wasn't the conversation.
No. There was no. There was no such thing as a retainer. You did it because you wanted to do it and hope for the best.
Right. You've got production credits on so many landmark albums, obviously without, no need to go into detail here, but do you see anything from those albums these days?
These days, no, but for a long time, things finally got to a point where I started making some money off of, I started making royalties off of agreements on various recordings, and for a number of years, I was getting regular payments in the mail for that, which was really nice. Some of the things outside of SST, I got some money here and there, blah, 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 whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But, early on, I had to figure out, well, I'm really not doing it for the money. I'm just hoping that there's some money there, make agreements, and hope they're honored.
When you were done with projects, would they give you copies of the record? You do a recording session, and 3 or 4 months later, they'd give you a copy?
Usually.
Yeah.
Usually, I'd get a copy. From being in the mastering room, there were test pressings that went out. So I would get test pressings too. Not on everything, and even some of the things that I got, I mean, I don't even have them anymore, So I have no idea insofar as the vinyl, I have no idea what I've got in my personal collection. I mean, I really don't have a personal collection.
Mm-hmm.
I was never a big record collector or fan of buying records. All I wanted to do was do the work, get it out there, and then move on.
Right. So you wouldn't even listen to a record. Even if they sent it to you, it's kind of like, oh, that's nice. You put it away. You don't need to revisit it.
For the most part, yeah. And plus I haven't had a turntable in over 30, 40 years.
Look, I know a lot of radio people. That's how they got paid. They wouldn't get anything from the radio station, but when they got the free records, those went to the record shop, and that's how they ate.
Yeah. I know a lot of people who did that. I mean, I was never that way. I didn't sell my stuff at record stores. I would maybe give it to a friend or something who
Mm-hmm.
I knew wanted the thing and that, and that's really about it. I just didn't have the time and space to be storing a lot of. I had to store a lot of tape.
Right.
So,
well, I guess if you had the choice, you picked the right one. Let's put it that way.
Well, I guess.
So let's just kind of spend a couple minutes on some of these bands. I'd be keen to get your recollections about working with them and recording with them. Just a few minutes per band is fine. Let's start with Descendents. You were recording them from their very first 45 through, I think, Summary, through Milo Goes to College and several others. What are your memories and recollections of recording Descendents?
They were always pretty fun to work with, even back to I even engineered their very first single, "Ride the Wild," but I was not the producer on that, really. And then when Frank had that Vox, what did he have? He had a Vox Mark VI, the teardrop guitar, the white one. I've always thought that was really. I always liked those old Vox guitars because they're just so stylish.
They're very unique. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Descendants. Well, the what was it? The Fat EP was real interesting, and bonus cups were done. Those guys would do bonus cups. Yeah, they were pretty nuts.
Bonus cups. Explain bonus cups. Sorry, what is that?
They started off. They were high school kids, you know, and who also were fishermen, and their whole lives were. They'd go to high school, and they were like straight A students. They did their homework, blah blah blah, whatever. But coming out of high school, they would immediately go down to the beach, get in their boat, and go out fishing. And this was stuff that they were delivering to people who had to sell these fish to make a living. So they were making some money off of doing that themselves, and maybe they were selling the stuff. I don't know that detail, but after they would do this fishing and smelling like fish, they'd go into a rehearsal room, still with their fishing boots on, and just play for a few hours, and to keep themselves awake, and then have to go home and do homework, then sleep a couple hours and get up the next day and go back to school again. So they made these bonus cups of coffee, and what it was you would take whatever cup you had, you would fill at least, you get instant coffee mix, and you would fill it at least maybe 3/4 of the way up the cup, and put in, and then you put in a bunch of sugar, and then at the very top there would be this hot water you put in, and then you just stir it and stir it and stir it until it was like this
mud.
It was mud. It was like motor oil, and then they drink these things. And I'm not kidding you. I witnessed this. I saw them do it. I tasted one myself, refused to drink it. Let them have the fun of that. So that was a bonus. That's what they did.
Oh gosh, and that was throughout the. I mean, I can see it in the early days, Fat EP, and maybe even through Milo. Milo seems to be Milo Goes to College seems to be, well, certainly is their breakthrough record. Anything special happened during that session that you recall?
It got done. Nothing particular I can remember, but it was just got down to nitty gritty and did it.
Does it surprise you that some of these records, like Fat EP and of course Ride the Wild, those are now going for $300-$400 or more?
I don't know if it surprises me. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the way the collector culture is things are priced according to their value on the market, and well, okay, fine. Mm-hmm. So be it. I don't really examine it or or
Mm-hmm.
I don't examine it that much anymore.
No, but I mean, yeah, these records that at one point I imagine they probably had a very difficult time selling or even giving away seem to be taking on a life of their own. And yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Misfits. What are your recollections of? Oh, this should be good. What are your recollections of recording Misfits?
They were very difficult to work with.
Mm-hmm.
But I do have one great story of one session that I don't think I'm going to tell it to you because I'm just going to save that for the book. I've already written it down for the book.
Wow. Okay.
And I've got a bunch of stories like that. Or I haven't found a publisher ready to take it on. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So you received a phone call. Who called you from Misfits? Was it one of the band members? Did they have a manager that called?
No, there wasn't a manager as far as I knew. They were just a touring band, and I think we talked face to face at some point. Just when at one point they wanted that they had some shows out in L.A. and they wanted to schedule a recording session. We went into one studio, and then it, I'll put it this way: the tape machine blew up, so we couldn't get anything done.
Mm-hmm.
It was not my fault. So I went out to New Jersey and said, well, let's go ahead and do it here. And so there was 2 studios out there that we worked in. I don't remember the names of any of them. It got to be a little difficult to keep control of what was happening. Sometimes it was certain people in the band thought they could mix it, and things went downhill. And there was one situation of not having enough money, and I said, no, you got to have a little more money. We need to do 4 hours rather than 2 hours. It's going to take, if you want it to come out like shit. And I had to really talk people into doing it the right
Mm-hmm.
way. Even people who ran the studio. Oh, gosh.
Right. Those Misfits recordings were really at the point where they were breaking up. So I would imagine being in the studio with them wasn't the most comfortable place to be. I imagine there was arguing and friction between members of the band.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I guess, but I think that was just a factor of living in New Jersey. People in New York and New Jersey, they have their own way of looking at life and dealing with life. And it's not that they're necessarily being antagonistic or anything. It's just that that's what they've had to do to survive this kind of middle class hell that they all had to deal with. Mm-hmm. Whether it was living in New York City or in a suburb in New Jersey across the river, there was just a lot of stuff. You had to be streetwise, and you had to talk and act streetwise just to get by. Mm-hmm. So, that's kind of maybe more, I'm referring to that more than anything else, really.
Mm-hmm. The album that resulted from the sessions, Earth AD and Wolf's Blood, there seems to be side A was Earth AD, side B was Wolf's Blood. Is that because it was 2 different studios, 2 different sessions?
I have no idea.
Okay.
First, Earth AD is the only one I know anything about. Wolf's Blood, what is it?
Well, the album is typically called Earth AD/Wolf's Blood.
Oh,
Yeah, and so there's side A.
see, I never got a copy of it, so I didn't even know what's on it.
Well, if you get an original copy these days, it'll be about as much as a cheap car.
I figure.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about recording Black Flag. You were there really since day one. I believe you actually played bass with a pre-Black Flag outfit, Panic. Yeah?
Just once, I was in their rehearsal room and they needed a bass player. I said, "Well, let me try."
Mm-hmm.
So it was just one rehearsal. We went through their set of about 6 songs twice, and that was it. Then I guess Chuck came in, but he had been in the building that they were in, which was the old bathhouse on the Strand in Hermosa. I think that Worm was in there first, and maybe they broke up, and then Panic started rehearsing in the space. I'm not clear on that detail.
Okay.
But then I guess just because Chuck was still around or something, or maybe Worm still was rehearsing there in another room that I guess Worm broke down, and Chuck decided to play with Panic.
So you were in that community. Was it that they naturally turned to you? You were working at Media Art at the time, that they naturally turned to you when they wanted to make a record?
Maybe. Media Art, people knew about the place at that time. And I know that Worm came up to record at one time. I witnessed the recording. I can't say that I was actually involved in it. In Media Art, you're coming in and out of that studio all the time. Sometimes just to walk into the control room and tell somebody who's there, "Hey, there's a phone call for you. What should I tell them?" You know, and then you go away and you do what you have to do. And sometimes it was just I'd be there hanging out because I just didn't feel like being anyplace else. I'd sit out in one of the rooms and read or something like that. But so yeah, Worm recorded maybe 76, something like that. Panic came about, and then they decided to record their first record, whether they were called Black Flag or not, that's the Nervous Breakdown thing. And I know I did a little bit on that, but I was not the main person on it. I had to do some rough mixes for them, and probably did maybe substituted for some overdubs or something. Okay, so that's how they got to know me through that. Plus, I was down on the Strand roller skating out of Wild Wheels, which was right there, and just a few doors down from the bathhouse where the wormhole was, where both of those bands did what they did. So I would see these guys out there on the Strand and say hi to them and blah blah blah. And sometimes say, "Oh, can I come in and see what you guys are doing here?" I was one of the few people they would let in because they were really afraid of being busted by someone for whether it was illegal substances or just animosity. So I mean, they were not well liked at that time, or understood in any way, shape, or form. I kind of started hanging out with them, and then they moved up into the church, and I'd run into them there because there was people already in the church, artists and that I knew. And I'd occasionally drop by and just to say hi to somebody. That
you were trusted by the band. You're part of their community, and so when they went to record, they naturally turned to you to be part of that process, and that seems to be a relationship that held through many years.
Well, I talked them into working with me on the Jealous Again stuff because I knew that they needed to record something and wanted to record something, and they knew that I knew what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
But it was at the time when I was kind of going from engineering into more production type style, and a lot of people liked my work and wanted to work with me, and they wanted my opinion in that. Well, what can you do?
Right.
So there was another local band I tried to produce once, and that didn't work out too good. And then these guys, I said, well, maybe this might be good. So I managed to talk them into coming up there and, in off hours and figuring it out from there.
Interesting. Okay, so you were seeing something there that you wanted to incubate. You saw something in them. You wanted to be there to help them record and evolve that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's quite significant because taking Black Flag, then I'll say under your wing, but at least you were looking out for them. You were getting them studio time here and there. That's pretty big for a budding band. I mean, that would help give them confidence, give them some recordings to work with. So it sounds like with you as part of the community, they were able to continue recording, and it's really for that reason we have a lot of these recordings today.
Mm-hmm. I guess so.
For the albums, especially things like My War or Damaged, were those recordings made at a single time, or was it like 2 or 3 from one session here, 2 or 3 from another session? What do you recall about that?
I mean, I have to actually think about this now. Oh. I should just say that they were all pretty much separate sessions. I'd say each album pretty much represents one whole era or one whole episode of a particular studio or session or project, whichever. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think that's all I can really say at this point.
Okay, so things like My War, that was done in a single studio, but not necessarily over the course of the same month. It may have taken 4 or 5 months over time to get enough to put it together for a record.
I don't know. Maybe.
Okay. What was your involvement with Black Flag during the lawsuit period? Were they able to do much in terms of recording? I imagine there was a lot of recording being done without letting the word get out too much. Yeah.
Oh, there was a lot going on under the radar,
mm-hmm.
and I guess the Everything Went Black album kind of speaks of that. There were, I think Everything Went Black was a collection of things that hadn't been released, things that had been recorded, and it was time to do something on their own, which of course caused another lawsuit, and they changed the artwork on it so the name of the band wasn't read. I'll put it this way. Wrestling with Unicorn didn't know what they were involved in,
mm-hmm.
because they thought that everyone would just do things by the traditional lawyer method, and there are other ways around lawsuits that can just drive the people running the lawsuit in the first place to just drive them batty with having to do way more legal work than they ever thought that they would have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that came about when they discovered Walter Hurst. Walter Hurst was the lawyer that they worked with. And and he understood independent thought and action. And I've never seen this guy wear a tie or a suit or anything like that. Apparently he would do his legal work when he did his best legal work, or most of his legal work, when he'd just get in the tub, just sit in the tub with, fill it, to go to take a bath, fill it with water, just sit there for hours, just writing his things and, figuring out, and that's how the guy worked. And so the band, they spent a lot of time in the office, and Walter was like, this is what's going to be cost effective. You guys need to do most of the legal work yourself, and you're going to save a lot of money. So they would be going up and going through his books and going through all of this stuff and figuring out ways to fight Unicorn. And they did not expect people to be that dedicated to saving their own asses.
Mm-hmm.
And so Unicorn was always getting thrown with something that their lawyers didn't want to deal with. And so more and more, it was taking up more and more of their time and their money. Meanwhile, the band and Walter Hurst were just saying, well, if we do this, if you guys figure this out, we can just run another pole up their butt. and now when I met, I got Walter to do a little work for me once.
Mm-hmm.
This has nothing to do with Black Flag. But one of the people that he was working with at the time, and I met her there, was Nina Simone.
Oh, okay.
Who Nina Simone was always a hero to me, and there she was standing in his office, and boy, she was cantankerous as hell. Really nice person, but she did not trust strangers, and but I managed to have a couple of words with her, and that, so she at least knew that I wasn't trying to scam her or anything like that. But, I thought, so he was working with people like that.
Wow.
Very, very interesting situation.
While working with Black Flag, they went through multiple lead singers. Did you have good relationships with each of them?
Each of the singers? God, I'm trying to remember who the singers were.
There was Keith. There was
Chavo and Henry. Well, yeah. Ultimately, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, I did.
Okay.
There were times when I guess I didn't for whatever reason, but it may or may not have anything to do with the singers themselves. But in the long run, yeah, if there were any issues that turned into negative issues between us, ultimately all of that was water under the river, and I'm on good terms with all of them now. The singers, that is. Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah, I don't think anyone's on good terms with Greg. It just seems to be the way it is. Look, Spot, I've taken up enough of your time. What are you doing these days? What keeps you busy now? Do you still do music?
I don't know. I mean, I still play, just on my own, but I'm not doing shows. I haven't done a show in maybe 10 years or so.
Mm-hmm. And Spot, I do want to call people to the attention of spotnator.com. which is your online blog. You've got a lot of photos from back in the day as well. You do quite a bit of photography as well, yeah?
Well, not anymore, but I did back then.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's some interesting photos, and you could tell it's back in the day. A lot of feathered Farrah Fawcett hair on the girls and roller skates, and
oh yeah,
that was a hell of a time.
Yeah, it was very unique time and culture there that I had no idea that it actually existed. I was just kind of there, just sheer dumb luck, I guess. I don't know. Okay.
Spot, thank you very much. I do appreciate it, man. And thanks for sharing those stories of back in the day. What a time it was, and man, you were a witness in the front row of music and punk rock history.